Absolutely, you do.
We've believed a lot of people who were not believed, haven't we?
Yes, we have. And it doesn't, when I try to explain this to people, we're not the judge and the jury. This is not a court case where we have to have this
No,
evidence,
that's
this
exactly right.
evidence,
Well, I'm hoping that the people that on Facebook Live are hearing Patti Giggans speak. She's my guest from Peace Over Violence. And of course, we'll be starting the show very soon on Voice America called Resiliency Within. And I hope you all know that you can get a hold of Patti too. Can't they, Patti? Peace Over Violence, the website is pretty. What's the website for Peace Over Violence? I'm going to ask
peaceoverviolence.org.
That's pretty easy to remember. Peace Over Violence. I love the name. So.
Yeah. Yeah, for many of us who work at Peace Over Violence, when we say our name, it kind of gives us, okay, Peace Over Violence. That's what we're working for.
And isn't it semantics is so important? Oh, here he is. Okay, here we go.
Hello, hello.
Hello, who do I have today? That doesn't sound like Matt's voice today.
No, this is Ryan. Matt wasn't feeling well today, so he's home.
Oh, hi, Ryan. It's my honor to introduce you to Patti Giggans. She's the executive director of Peace Over Violence in Los Angeles.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Hi, Ryan.
You. All right. What was your name again? I'm sorry.
Patti Giggans.
All right, Patti. Awesome. All right, Elaine, let's do a quick sound check here. If you could count backwards from 5 for me.
Sure. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right. Sounding really good with that microphone there. Patti,
okay.
Go ahead and count backwards for me.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right. That'll do. You don't have a microphone that you can hook up?
No.
Okay. Maybe if you just get a little bit closer to the computer, that would be helpful.
How's this? Better?
Oh, yeah. That's great. All right. Perfect. All right. So I know you have a billboard, right, that needs to play in the beginning of the show.
That's right.
Okay. And then one at the end, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. Perfect. And then you take one commercial break at the bottom of the hour?
Yes.
All right. Perfect. Just wanted to make sure to confirm that. Matt let me know what that stuff was when I talked to him this morning. So.
Well, tell Matt I hope he feels better when you talk to him.
Yeah, I'm actually going to give him a call after this.
Thank you, Ryan.
See how he's doing. All right, you guys sound good. We're just going to hold tight here. We still got, I think about 4 minutes here before we get started. So if you guys want to chit chat before we get going, sound check is good to go. And I'll send a quick chat message over really quick, just as a test.
Okay, and you'll give me the 4-minute warnings for the break and for the end, as Matt does.
Absolutely. Yep. 4, 3, 2, 1. Yep.
All right. Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Wonderful. All right. You guys just hold tight. Hello, everybody on Facebook. Hope you enjoy the show.
Thank you, Ryan.
It's my pleasure.
So yes, we're waiting, and we're going to hear music in just a few seconds, Patti. And I just want to say how much I like your background.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
My home office with my mugshots of Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King that were
love that
from when they were the, freedom riders.
I love they were so young.
Oh yeah. We were once.
Yeah, so were we. They're a little older than us, though, just a little. One of my friends here in Claremont was a freedom rider with Martin Luther King. He recently died as well. John McGuire, he was the president of the Claremont Graduate University for a while. And when he was president, oh my gosh, he would bring so many incredible people, including Maya Angelou and Quincy Jones and so many people he would bring in.
I did a week-long leadership stage, kind of like fellowship at Claremont It was like
Ah.
it was early on when I was becoming an executive, or learning how to be an executive director.
Sorry to interrupt. We got about 2 minutes before we get started. Just wanted to give you
Okay.
a time check.
Thank you,
And
Brian.
it was really elemental to my thinking about how to be a leader. And because one of the theses, we studied Shakespeare, we studied the Holocaust. We had the most amazing
Wow.
professors, and it was immersion all day, evenings. And one of the most important things that I'll never forget is when they said, "Who did the Holocaust?" And the answer was, it was business people. It was leaders who were in business. They turned away or they made money. Either way, they were part of, and they were trying to impress upon us is that we have responsibilities.
Well, and I hope that, we're going to talk about movements. We'll talk about leadership when we get started. We're going to hear some music very, very soon.
Okay.
That will be our prompt about the show starting. And some of our listeners on Facebook already know that because they've been here before with us. So, well, I think the Claremont colleges have been really a citadel of all sorts of wonderful societal, cultural, educational information for certainly the community that I live in, but also I think for the wider world.
All
There's
right,
so
we
many
got about
international
30 seconds here. Okay.
Thank you.
I'll feed you guys some audio here in about 10 seconds.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan.
Time 10 a.m. Pacific on Voice America Health and Wellness.
All right, here we go.
The following program is being brought to you on the Voice America Health and Wellness channel. For more information about our network and to check our additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericahealth.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the following program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management. Resiliency Within, with host Elaine Miller-Karras, is brought to you by Trauma Resource Institute, Incorporated. Visit traumaresourceinstitute.com.
Welcome to Resiliency Within, featuring your host, Elaine Miller-Karras. In unprecedented times, our beliefs and well-being are put to the test. When we take the things we've learned in life and look at challenges in a whole new way, we learn to develop resiliency, which can then be used to promote healing and personal strength. Now, here is Elaine Miller-Karras.
Welcome to Resiliency Within. I'm your host, Elaine Miller-Karras. Today's show is entitled Peace Over Violence, Movements Matter. And my guest is a colleague and a friend, Patti Giggans, who's been the executive director of Peace Over Violence since 1985. Maybe before some people who are listening were born, Patti, that could be the case. So Peace Over Violence came into existence out of the feminist violence against women movement in the late 60s and early 70s. And this year, Peace Over Violence celebrates its 50th year. Wow, I'm just so impressed with that. POV operates the longest running sexual and domestic violence hotline in the country and are the originators of Denim Day movement. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about what that means, Denim Day, Patti, and the longest running sexual violence prevention campaign now in its 22nd year. So Patti Giggans will share her perspectives of why movements from civil rights to violence against women to disability and LGBTQI rights to the current Black Lives Matter and MeToo matter, and how they shape our national dialogue and influence social policy. I want to tell you a little bit more about Patti. She's served on many local, state, and national advisory committees, including the Trauma Resource Institutes, on several board of directors, and is the former chair and current commissioner of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Civilian Oversight Commission. She's the founder of Denim Day, has co-created violence prevention curricula, and has co-authored several books, including When Dating Becomes Dangerous. Giggans has received the California Peace Prize, the Angel of Peace Award, I think she's an angel myself, and 2016 Visionary Voice Award, and is a Durfee Foundation Stanton Fellow. Welcome, Patti. As we start, I'm just wondering what is on your mind as we begin.
Oh, you know what's on my mind today? Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Elena. You are one of my favorite conversationalists because you stimulate so much creativity in my brain. But you know what's on my mind today? When I stepped outside this morning, here it was in LA. It was so beautiful, and it was spring, but just before we start to get the hot weather. And I just had I thought, I'm glad I'm talking to Elaine because I'm having a peaceful moment and I want to share it with her.
Oh my goodness. Well,
So yeah,
I
so
feel honored.
Peace is on my mind. Peace is on my mind.
And here you've been leading Peace Over Violence, this incredible organization for so many years. And I know we first met, your wife, Ellen, introduced us many years ago now. And we had some commonalities in our experience of wanting to provide healing modalities. We're both aware, we talked about it earlier today, that this is Mental Health Awareness Month. And Ellen is a licensed clinical social worker like myself. And we both, Patti, I think, believe in bringing ideas into the world, into community that are accessible, affordable, adaptable. And that's why one of the things I want to ask you first, one of the questions is, the word resiliency right now can be a controversial word, and yet it's also a very powerfully strong word. But I'm wondering if you could give us your definition of resiliency. What does that mean to you?
Yeah. Well, yeah, resilience and resiliency to me means the capacity to go beyond surviving. There's an element of thriving. There's an element of learning. There's an element even of transcending, but it's physical, it's spiritual, it's in the body, but it's in the spirit, and our minds have a lot to do with it. One of the things I think that's important to remember about resiliency, it doesn't mean that you haven't suffered.
Yes.
I think that's why folks sometimes say, oh, everybody's talking about resiliency, but so much has happened, we can't negate. And resiliency is not about negating trauma or suffering or circumstances. It's about surviving them, beginning to thrive, and finding ways to suffer less at some point.
And I couldn't agree more, because I think if we do not acknowledge the suffering and even touch into it and sense it, then it's hard for us to start it's almost like if we're cultivating a garden, and if we didn't pay attention to there's seasons in the garden and said, oh, there's only summer. Well, that really wouldn't be true. And it wouldn't really be about the natural way of how, in an organic way, that plants grow. And then I think that we suffer, but then there's something that comes out of the suffering. And that's, I think, goes along the lines of my idea of what it means to kind of cultivate our well-being, so that we can continue on, and maybe even stronger and with more transformational insights than we had from before, whatever the event may have been. So thank you for sharing.
Just let me add that one of the, you could almost call it a motto for Buddhism, is to be present for the joys and sufferings of the world.
Yes.
It goes together.
Yeah.
It's not pleasant a lot of the times.
Well,
but you know what? Suffering is part of life.
Suffering is part of life. And sometimes I wonder if we would appreciate joy in the same way if we didn't have the suffering.
Exactly.
So Patti, that kind of brings me into how has your lived experience, maybe your suffering, impacted your passion for the work that you do in the world?
Well, that's a big question.
I know it's a big question.
I've been around the block a few times now.
No, because I know you're not 39 anymore.
Right. I feel so grateful that everything that's happened to me in my life, I've been able to redirect, to give back, and to grow. It's interesting that for me, our topic is how movements matter. And,
Yes.
what was really instrumental in my growth was when I was already working at this agency. We had a different name back then. And we worked with on sexual assault, on domestic violence, on child sexual abuse and youth violence prevention. That's our mission. And so in the early days of when I began working with POV, we would talk about what happened to us. It's just part of the conversations. It was intentional, but staff would talk. It was part of the DNA of the organization for us to kind of be vulnerable with one another.
And you think that vulnerability is also about witnessing, like
yes,
for the first time, people were talking about stories that had been long hidden.
Right. So here I was, I'd taken this job, I'm working at Peace Over Violence, working on domestic violence, and I had never really talked about how I had witnessed domestic violence as a child in my family, and that my stepfather was abusive to my mother, and it really destroyed our family. I left home when I was 15, never to live with my mother again because of all of that. But here I was, an adult, and in my, movement professional career, and I had never talked about it, and actually didn't. I was working, on behalf of victims, but didn't see myself as part of that in that way, of a lived experience. And what happened was our movement, and this is where I think it's so important, our movement started to actually include witnessing domestic violence, witnessing children witnessing domestic violence. So once our movement started to talk, because I was never battered. So I personally directly wasn't abused, but I was in this environment, right? And I witnessed this as my brother did. And until the movement started talking about it and pointing to it, that's when it was like, oh, that's me. That's my part. And it was a revelation. And so again, when I feel like movements do that, movements do things on big scales, but they do things on the individual scale also.
Well, I think it's so interesting too, because here you were working with Peace Over Violence, and you actually had this aha moment as you were working with them,
Yes.
yet you were called to work in this kind of organization. I think there's so many things that we do with not necessarily intentionality, almost an unconscious calling that this is an important thing. And then all of a sudden the dots are connected. And I think, for our listeners, it's so important to pay attention to that. I realize that many people of different ages listen to us. And I mean, I think for me, if you would have said, oh, Elaine, one day you're going to be a radio talk host and you're going to run a international nonprofit, I said, oh, that doesn't sound like me, right? Did we know then what we know now, right? That the journey of life leads us in twists and turns to what we end up becoming. But it's the becoming, in my experience, it's not that there's an endpoint that we're all becoming. And even though we're older women, we've had a lot of lived experience, we're still becoming on this journey. And that to me is profound.
I'll always be grateful to the anti-violence against women movement for a lot of things, but for including me. Yes. And people like me. And then I could include that in my work and include others. And we've done that. We do that. Movements do that.
And movements started small, because I remember talking to you when I was very small with the Trauma Resource Institute. And you said, oh, Elaine, there were like 4 people that were in the organization. And now there's well over 4 people in Peace Over Violence. I'm happy to say there's well over 1 person in Trauma Resource Institute as well. But I think that stick-to-itiveness, and also sometimes I think there's something about being a woman and that feminist perspective. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about pioneering feminism. And what does that mean? And I know that's embedded in the roots of the Peace Over Violence.
Yes, our organization was started by pioneering feminists. That's what we call them, because this was in the late 60s, early 70s, when the civil rights and the rights era, it's the rights era of our country, civil rights, LGBTQ rights, disability rights, women's rights. And it was these feminists who were starting to think about, well, there were there was consciousness raising groups early on in the feminist movement. And a lot of women were talking to each other about their lives. And in fact, it's really funny. I remember that one person let me know back in the day, they said, I'm in this consciousness raising group and we were talking about our lives. And some of us felt that we were all married to the same man because of the habits. And also some of it was about violence that was happening within those relationships.
And that there was so much silence because people thought exactly only one. And even the silence of being a witness. and not realizing that being a witness to violence does something to us. And of
Right.
course, we know that through neuroscience, the vicarious trauma, and how there's actually changes in the brain that happen.
Yeah.
But these were conversations in the beginning. We didn't have the framework of the neuroscience that we have now. And so I think it's really important that the bravery and courage that many women had. And, people say to me, well, sometimes the word feminism can also be weaponized. And to me, I'm going to tell you what my definition of feminism, and it's the perspectives of women matter, and that we have a different vista than men. And I'm not sure how the non-binary movement, in terms of how people identify, but I also want to just say that I think it's important that we acknowledge that as well, because there's a whole perspective that I've been learning about people that are non-binary and how they also have been put into certain buckets that haven't been their lived experience. So I imagine that we're going to expand, because that's also, I think, a movement that's coming forward, that we're all being changed by as we learn what people's experiences have been. So I think, Patti, is, just you said this much. I mean, that so much of what you've done is about helping have people have a platform to be able to speak and be witnessed. And I know I've been to some of your functions where I am in tears when people tell their story, but really from this kind of strength-based perspective. And that brings me to, people may not know that you're not a tall person. How tall are you? I just want to
4'11 3/4.
Okay. And I want you all to know that you're a black belt in martial arts. Isn't that true? And can you illuminate, I think, because that's part of your incredible journey, the spots of enlightenment when you were in Paris, because you shared with me about being 1 in 99 that connects to this journey. Let us know a little bit more about that so that listeners know.
Let me put a little context before Paris.
Sure, absolutely.
Paris is so this really, Patti Giggans really becoming educated as a feminist, late 60s, early 70s. That was the era. And I was living and working in New York. And at some point I got married. And it was really interesting because so much was going on in the politics, almost like today. There is a similarity, so much engagement and excitement and learning of new things and new history. That's when women started to learn, we started to learn our history, through that time. And so what happened, I was really connected to the anti-Vietnam War movement. And I was protesting the war. And among other things, and was in consciousness raising groups. And I was being a caseworker at the City of New York Social Services Department. And it's really interesting because of my marriage, my husband at the time was a journalist and was asked to go to Vietnam to be a war correspondent. So we went. So I went from protesting the war in Vietnam, in New York City, to actually living in downtown Saigon. This is 1970, 71, 72, right? And what an experience. And I was reflecting recently about how I've matured and how I really try to consider all sides of something and all the ingredients of the situation. But when I was younger, I thought I was right. I thought I had the answers. And I thought in terms of the Vietnam War, there was no other story. I was against the war. We shouldn't be there, never should have happened. And we need to get out now.
So when you lived in Saigon, it broadened your perspective.
Exactly. I'm living in Saigon and I'm meeting Vietnamese people from all walks of life. And I'm seeing the more complexity, the complexity.
And do you think that perspective of seeing the complexity about the Vietnam War and the movement that you were involved in, and then seeing what it was like to live, that's now imbued your ideas into the other movements that you're involved in terms of not seeing the one road?
Once I started to acknowledge that to myself, that I don't have all the answers and that there's not necessarily one right way to do something, and that it's important to be open and to receive and to see and look at all the ingredients, all the sides, and not have from a place of rigidity that there's no other side and only my opinion matters, or this only one opinion matters. That was a profound experience, and I was young then, and it stayed with me. it stayed with me. And when I start to get a little rigid or a little confirmed in my view, I remind myself, what else are you not seeing? What information do you not have?
And I often say, when I'm trying to explore something, I say, well, what else could be true besides this? Right. What else could be true? And so is that where you first got interested in martial arts, was when you were living in Vietnam?
Yes. Well, part of it was I wanted to take a self-defense class when I was being a caseworker in New York City, to protect myself, to do my job. And I took a couple of classes. And then when I started, I think I want to do a martial art, but then we left the country. So I started training in Taekwondo in Vietnam. And then from there, we moved to Paris. And so in Paris, I continued my studies and training in Japanese martial arts. And I was the only woman in the school of my sensei. Sensei is teacher, right? My karate teacher. And I was always only the women, or women would come and they'd leave after 1 or 2 classes. So my instructor, my sensei, said to me, why don't you teach a class on Saturday just for women? He gave me this idea. This idea came from a man. Patti, why don't you teach a class on Saturdays, and maybe more women will be exposed and want to do martial arts? Because I was so keen on it. I wanted to share it with other women. It changed my life, and so that's what happened. I got my black belt, and then I went through a program at the University of Paris, their sportif section. It was a 1-year program to get a certification in teaching martial arts. And I was one of 99 men. I was the only woman that went through this program, and so it was heavy lifting, I was one of the first women to get a black belt. And then when I came back to the United States, with this idea of opening my own karate school. I mean, it was a cockamamie idea, right? But I did it. I came to Los Angeles and I did it.
And you did it. And was it directed for all people, or was it directed
for women? It was for women, but all kinds of women. So it wasn't just the athlete. And it was we had fat women, we had skinny women, we had women, we had queer women, we had young women, we had older women, and it was amazing. And again, we were a feminist martial arts school. And right around it, I was doing that around the country. You talk about the collective unconscious. Yes. There were schools similar to ours opening up around the country, in San Francisco, in New York, in Chicago. And so that was another period of, I like these little periods of little enlightenments, Well, and women in the martial arts, I was, I participated in that organization, first time ever, Women in the Martial Arts. It was like, it was really different. It was pretty radical, but we kept finding each other.
Well, it sounds to me like you've been a pioneer in more than one area from talking to you, Patti, but we also talked about your spiritual path, and how did the martial arts influence your spiritual path?
Well, it really did. I mean, I practiced martial arts pretty regularly for, almost daily for 20 years, right? And one of the reasons I wanted to learn the martial arts was because I never wanted to hurt someone by accident. I wanted to defend myself, yes, but I never wanted to actually inflict pain or hurt someone else by accident. That if I did it, I had to do it on purpose, with skill and control, and so with mindfulness.
With mindfulness, an intentional practice.
Intentional, yes. And from that, I did get interested in all things Japanese and martial arts and Zen, and little by little that led me to practice Zen Buddhism.
So from this, and you were explaining to me a little bit about this journey, but as part of this journey, you said that there were some questions that emerged, and it was so connected again to your spiritual path and what you had learned in your lived experience through martial arts and other aspects of your life. And there were questions like, is there a right of not being beaten by your partner because you're a female, a child?
Yeah, exactly. And that's, that connects, am I wanting to teach self-defense to women and to children, so that they learned how to protect themselves. it really does link to the whole civil rights and the feminist movement of what rights are there for women and children to not be harmed in these ways by their close in relationships. You know what I mean? Because we're not just talking about strangers when it comes to these kinds of harms and violences. You know, we're talking about intimate partners, we're talking about family members, we're talking about acquaintances, we're talking about people who work together. You know, most violence and abuse comes from people that know each other. You know, this is a human dilemma, a human issue, a human tragedy that we need to continue to work on. But I got that question is,
Right.
we have the right as women. Do we have the right as women to not to be beaten or to be sexually assaulted or to be raped or to be diminished in any way? Do we have a right to enter the workplace and to be able to do our jobs without being sexually harassed? Can we walk down the
And
street?
certainly, when we're talking about movements again, I mean,
Yeah.
the Me Too movement we've seen, especially in all over the country, all over the world, but in Los Angeles, that certainly has been a very powerful movement. But I'm just also wanting to come back to a little bit to POV. How did these questions lead you to work with Peace Over Violence?
Well, you know, actually, the way I got engaged with the organization is that they came and found me at my karate school and asked me if I would help them with their self-defense program. So I started to as a volunteer, and then I was a volunteer on the hotline, and then I was helping them teach their. Then I was a consultant for a while, and then I got hired on as the director of training and the self-defense manager. And little by little, I was all in. And we were only 5 or 6 or 7 of us at that time, you know, and now we're 75, 78 employees now with almost a $5 million budget that I'm in charge of making sure we raise every year. So it led me to so many other dimensions of being a grown-up, you know, just by my getting involved.
Well, you know, and when you
ago.
say that, I want people to know about Denim Day, because that was something that you co-founded. And I know that one time you even went to France for Denim Day. I remember you
Went to Italy.
Italy rather.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yes, Denim Day, which we just had our 22nd annual Denim Day in April this year, Denim Day 2021. It is a campaign that was inspired by a Supreme Court judge in Italy who overturned a lower court's rape conviction, saying that the young woman, I think she was 18 at the time, the young woman was wearing tight jeans. Therefore, she probably had to help this guy take off her jeans. Therefore, it wasn't rape, it was consensual sex. So this was about the tight jeans, right? So right away, there was an uproar in Italy, and the female parliamentarians posed a protest wearing jeans. They called it the jeans alibi on the steps of the court. And that spread to Sacramento, where in California, in Sacramento, our assembly members and senators saw that on TV, and they wore jeans in solidarity with the Roman parliamentarians. And I saw that like from one day to the next. I followed this news story and I thought, oh my goodness, this is an opportunity. We all should be wearing jeans on purpose to not only protest the what she's wearing myth, but all the myths about that justify or excuses why someone is assaulted or raped. And so we started it at our agency, and it's spread, and now it's national and international. People just do their own Denim Day now.
Well, and so Patti, I just want to call to everyone's attention. Notice the spark of seeing something, seeing the connections, and then saying, well, we can start something. This is also what movements are about, because again, we don't know what is going to happen as the idea is sparked that 22 years later, that it would be an international event and that you would one day go to Italy in terms of having seen this and being a part of the acknowledgement of your work.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you say about the spark. I mean, because for me, I feel like I'm a movement baby. I grew up in movements. I mean, I've been so influenced. The civil rights movement influenced me as a kid dramatically, right? And then I'm wanting to do martial arts. And so I'm part of then the women in the martial arts movement. And at the same time, of course, I'm a feminist. And so it's women's rights and women free from violence. And, and then it's like really moving on to Me Too and all these these movements are profound.
Well, and I think that as you say that, I mean, need to take a little pause for our break, but I want to talk more about this when we come back, because you have been what I call a natural leader. You didn't know it was going to happen. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means and a little bit more about movements. So stay with us, listeners. Patti Giggans will be back with us after the break, and she will illuminate us with her spark. And I know there's more sparks in your future, Patti. I can see it in your face. So there you go. So we will be back in a couple minutes. And this is Elaine Miller-Karras, Resiliency Within on Voice of America. And we will take a short pause.
All right, we're all clear.
Thank you. And so
I have a question for you, Patti.
Great.
What style of karate do you do?
Oh, I studied Wado Ryu and Shotokan.
Okay, so I do Okinawan Matsubayashi Shorinryu.
Oh, Shorinryu. I know it. I know
Okay.
it. Yeah, very good. I'm not doing that now, I have to say.
I'm working on my brown belt right now.
Oh, very good.
Oh,
Yeah.
Ryan, I just love that. He put in the chat that karate, that martial arts changed his life too.
Yeah, changed mine too. Absolutely.
Totally changed my life.
That's great.
It makes you think about things that you didn't really think about before.
Ryan, can you tell Patti what you do at Voice America?
Yes, I'm the vice president of broadcast operations. I manage our audio engineering team, our host services, which is like our customer service department. And I do trainings for brand new hosts that are coming on board.
He trained me. He did a
Yep.
training for me. Yes.
How long have you been practicing Shorinryu?
So here's what's kind of weird for me. So I was really into Okinawan Kempo a lot. Like, when I was younger, when I had gotten out of the military, I started doing that. I probably did that for, I don't know, almost 10 years. And then I stopped martial arts completely. So I'm 40. So I stopped martial arts like right around when I was around 30 years old. And then I bought a house and had got married and had a kid and all that stuff. And my kid is now 7. And so 2 years ago, I was like, I think it's time for you to go to karate. I mean, she's a girl, and I love what you guys are talking about, because, it's like, I need her to be prepared for life, and
Right.
I don't want her to have to depend on anybody for anything, including protecting herself. And so, it's really important to me. And at my house, karate is non-negotiable. It's not something that she's allowed to say, Dad, I don't want to go. I want to quit. It's like, nope, I don't, that you cannot quit. You have to go do this.
Right.
Does she like it, Ryan? Does she like it?
She does on days, and then she doesn't on other days. Doing forms and katas and different things can be very repetitive, and it's kind of maybe a little boring for a 7-year-old. But she does love to spar. So that's fun. She has all of her pink sparring gear, and we're coming back here. So let me
Okay.
keep talking, but we could talk some more after the
We'll
show.
talk later.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan.
Coming back.
This is Resiliency Within with Elaine Miller-Karras. To reach the show during our live broadcast, please call in to 1-866-472-5792. That's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email to elaine@resiliencywithin.com. Now, back to this week's show.
We are now back with Patti Giggans, and she's going to continue to illuminate us about her perspectives about the world and how she sparks movements and how she believes in movements. But I want to say a little bit more, that I believe, Patti, that you're a natural leader, and natural leaders emerge in movements. It was not what someone set out to do, like we were talking about earlier, but it's almost your compassionate action as a reaction to a lived experience. And so my definition of a natural leader are individuals who may or may not have a formal education or designated leadership role, but are looked to for guidance because of their embodied personal qualities. And this is the important part of treating others with respect, compassion, and empathy. And they also share their wisdom and equanimity in a way that encourages and empowers their community. And I just want to acknowledge you because I think you're that kind of person. So can you illuminate us a little bit more about kind of how the embodied natural leader that you are and how that came to be. And tell us more about that.
Well, thank you for that definition of a natural leader. That's and complimenting me with that.
Yeah, well, I believe it, as you
Yeah,
know.
I don't know how now, I mean, it's interesting about different times in my life when I've had to step up, when I've had to use my voice for myself or on behalf of others. I've always, taking it as an advocate, you use your voice, your personhood, your privilege, your position, your knowledge on behalf of others. And I think that's just as an important part of the way I try to live my life. And it's a way to join with others too. So then you're not alone. See, I think that's with leaders. I don't think we want to be alone. Like the Lone Ranger leader. That's why for me, cooperation, collaboration is so important. I mean, I do write poetry alone, but so many things that I usually do in groups, and probably my wife Ellen calls me a family addict. She says that I like to be with people, So I think maybe my leadership has been a self-serving thing. I don't want to be lonely or alone. So I get out there and find people to do things, start campaigns, invent things with me.
Well, and I think that's like when you talk about, you've built community, and that's what I've seen from you from the first moment that I met you. And I think that I've seen you work from the bottom up that also brought you into the top down world, right? And you're on the police commission. I mean, my goodness, that's a honorable role, and one that you do have some impact on what happens in our community. And I know that you've collaborated with law enforcement, and that's been an important collaboration. Do you think you can talk a little bit about that? Because when you started, when there was only 5, 6, 7 of you, you may not have had the same collaboration with law enforcement that you have now. Yeah. So how have you sparked that?
Well, this is one of the most timely conversations that we're having, that we need to be having. And it's our relationship to law enforcement in our country. And Peace Over Violence, which had a different name back in the day, we were known as the Los Angeles Commission on Assaults Against Women, LACAW. We were a reaction to law enforcement, particularly to LAPD. Those pioneering feminists started this organization because of the way LAPD treated rape and domestic violence victims. And so then over the years from that reaction, we started to collaborate more, training them, and also being the advocates. If there is a domestic violence call, we're the advocates. We're not the only ones, because now it's part of the whole system that we have, where you have staff and volunteer advocates trained in domestic violence to be able to be there with the survivors and help them navigate healing, navigate the criminal justice system if they choose to go through that. So it's law enforcement, it's a very big deal. And so, yes, we've collaborated and we've been critical throughout these 50 years. At this juncture right now, at this period of racial reckoning in our country, everyone is looking at, where do we go from here? How do we make it better, since there are abuses, there are systemic abuses that have happened with law enforcement and the criminal justice system. And it's a critical so question.
Do you see Peace Over Violence being involved in the dialogue with law enforcement about what you call as the reckoning that we've seen all over the country?
Yes, absolutely. Because, people talk about alternatives to law enforcement. People talk about alternatives to incarceration. We actually provide that function, because our advocates, we go where a domestic violence survivor or a sexual assault or rape victim, where they want to go. If they feel that they want to go through the system, the criminal justice system, report to law enforcement, press charges, all of that, we will do that with them as their advocates. We will accompany them, and we will try to help them make informed decisions by making sure they get good information. But if they choose not to go through that, which many do not choose, we are there for the healing, the counseling, the support, all the services, the support groups,
So,
for
I
the
think that
triggering moments when you can
right
call our hotline and some
is
skillful person will be able to talk with you.
well. So I
We're
think
there
that's
for that also.
So I think that's an important part that I would like to amplify is that if people were to call a domestic violence organization anywhere in the country, but I think Peace Over Violence, you've been a leader in this, is that there are some people that it's for whatever reason, could be financial, it could be many reasons that they choose not to leave. You're not going to leave that person in the lurch, that there are services that you can still provide and that they can have a, a segue into conversations when they need to. Like you said, counseling and things like this. There's not a requirement, oh, you have to leave the abusive partner in order to get services here. We are there to support you and to help you create a safer environment for yourself and your family.
And what we've been doing a lot through this pandemic with DV victims who've been calling us is kind of guiding them how to stay because they can't leave.
Right.
No shelters were full and closed. There were not a lot of movement because we're quarantining. And so a lot of the guidance had to do was like really listen. And this is what we do. We listen to hear what the issues are. What's the dilemma? What is this person trying to figure out for themselves and support them? And so talking about safety in place, that's what's been going on for this past year when it comes to domestic violence.
So you had to change who knew we were going to be dealing with a pandemic? So, so people were given ideas on how to be safer in their home.
And often they have ideas. See, that's the thing. We're not necessarily originating the ideas. It's that they're grappling. Should I do this? Should I do that? We're a sounding board. We're good listeners. We reflect back. Oh, it seems like what you're really wanting to do now is make sure that you at least go in the backyard and don't go do gardening and get away from the situation and have some space. You want to create space daily so that you can keep, the tensions down. Sounds like that's what it's part of your safety plan. So we kind of want to reflect back on what their ideas already are and also give them some other ways to think about it.
Well, and this gives me
been a whole year of safety in place.
Safety in place. And so I'm going to ask you a little bit, because one of the ways that we met was that back when we first started with the community resiliency model, you came to me, you and an organization down in San Diego, and said, could you provide training in this body-centered model? Now, are you still using the community resiliency model within Peace Over Violence? And if so, can you illuminate how it's being used? For example, is it used on calls to help people with skills, or is it used by the staff? What kinds of things might you be doing with this?
Well, we train in the community resiliency model. We're a big training organization. Every staff person who works with us and every volunteer, they have to go through an 80-hour training. And within that, it's about more than you ever want to know about domestic and sexual assault, right? And counseling and listening, how to be a good listener, all of that, the dynamics. And part of that is we train in CRIM, the community resiliency model, because it is something that anyone can do. Children can use it. Parents can teach it to their children, right? So our volunteers go through it in the training, our staff goes through it. And yes, you can do it on the telephone, as you know. I mean,
yes,
you taught us how to do it.
Yes, I did teach you how to do it. But it's always interesting to me.
It's definitely part and parcel of POV and everything that we do. And the other day I wound up using it on the phone with one of my staff members who is at a point, when we're all quarantining, we're still working remotely. And some of us are hitting the wall right now and want to, get back out there. But I used it on the phone recently, and so it's definitely part and parcel. That was so fortuitous that, that POV was able to find you. And with our collaborative agency in San Diego, we were able to find some money to actually develop our Triumph, our resilience, our trauma and resiliency program. We expanded and deepened the trauma work that we were doing before we found CRIM.
Well, and I felt very honored because we had just finished our pilot, because it was 2013. It was when we were first starting. That's 8 years ago now. So it's wonderful to see that it's still been living and doing well.
Yeah. Well, you know what my staff calls it?
What?
They call it crimming.
Crimming. Oh, it's now. I love that it's a verb.
Crimming. Okay, we got to do some crimming.
We're going to do some crimming.
I think such and such should do some crimming.
I love that. I just love that, Patti. But, I think that's kind of bring me, because, you do so much in the world. Just, I've seen you in action. I've been to POV, and, you have so much spunk. And then I know you've suffered too. So what are the things in your life that have helped you get through? What's uplifted you? What's given you courage? What's a person, a place, a thing? What are the things that enliven you to help you get through the difficult times in your life?
Oh, many things. I think I'm like, I would say I have a smorgasbord of things,
Oh, I'd love that. So can you share some with us?
Yeah,
Maybe
well, for example, my relationships really matter to me. My family, my friend, my colleague relationships. I enjoy them and depend on them, so relationships really matter. And the fact that I have a pretty active spiritual life through my Zen Buddhism, I was raised Catholic, and I consider myself Jewish adjacent.
I love that. What does Jewish adjacent mean?
Well, I'm not a Jew myself, but I'm married to a Jew. We raised our daughter Jewish, and we have our Friday, Shabbats, and yet we celebrate Christmas in our house, and we go to the Zen Center of Los Angeles and have our teachings and our meditations, and so it's all those things are really, really important to me. My work is, as much as work can be a burden at times, work is also a solace because I have a purpose. Yeah. I have a purpose. And so purpose matters also, but friendships, collegial friendships. I love learning new things. I love learning and adding things to the menu, of my life. And I enjoy writing poetry, reading and writing poetry. I have a love-hate relationship with writing in general. It's like I hate.
Well, you have smorgasbord is the right term. And now I'm also I want to ask you a question, because one of the people that you've told me about in your life was your dad, and that he had a restaurant, if I recall correctly. Can you just say a little bit about that? Because I'm wondering about how that influenced you being around a restaurant when you're a kid.
I grew up in an Italian restaurant. My brother and I, and then subsequent my two sisters, we all grew up in my father's restaurant, Goldie's Restaurant on Long Island. You learn a lot in the restaurant business. First of all, you learn how to work hard. And you have long hours and you work nights often, right? So it's not
and
easy.
You haven't done any of that with Peace Over Violence. Worked hard.
Right.
Nice, right? I'm just seeing the connection here. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Right. And so you learn a lot. That's why people who people who say, "Well, I'm an actor, but I'm also a waitress or a waiter." It's like, you're working hard. I know you are. But so it's like what my dad is being able to. But one of the things my dad taught me, though, I think, is he would remember. He was amazing. He was a great host. He would remember the families that would come in and they would ask about, well, how's your grandfather doing? Or, isn't your son 7 years old now? I mean, he would remember these things about people's lives. I don't have that kind of memory that he has, but he was a memory. So he would be like this official greeter and welcome people to the restaurant. But one thing he taught me, he said, "Patti," he said, people are never appreciated enough. Mm. And so that's what he did in the restaurant. He would remember people. He remembered what they ordered. He said, "Oh yeah, you like your lasagna without meat, or something, or you don't want olives on your salad." I mean, he would remember that about me. And that was his way of people, he used to say, "Love is in the food." That was
love is in the food.
Love is in the food. And for my dad, love was in the restaurant. And later on, when I moved away and went to college and lived in other countries and moved to LA and never really lived in New York again, right? The restaurant was where you wanted to see my dad, you went to Goldie's Restaurant. That's where you saw him. That was his life. He died just short of 90. No, he did. He was 90. We had a big celebration for him, but he died running his restaurant at 90.
I love that. And I still want to say people are never appreciated enough.
Yes, people are never appreciated enough.
And when I think about natural leaders, I always love to see those threads of connection from your dad to you and how you spread that into the world. And I guess can we just segue back a little? We have a little bit of time left, but so when you talk about your lived experience and how does the movements matter to you? Why do you think movements are important to humanity? I really heard that from you. Movements are important to humanity.
They are. Movements are important to humanity and to transformation and to progress, right? And I think part of it is that movements can communicate at a level where a lot of people can hear the issues. And then usually there are easy ways to join, even if the first way you join is you show up at a protest march. I mean, movements are way beyond protest march. That's just a part of movement. Movement is really about, movements you often are about educating, inviting participation, and including people, and really listening to people's voices, and bringing the best movements can bring these seem like disparate voices and make some cohesion out of them, and which eventually can influence policy and practices.
And so when you think about, there's people maybe listening to this show that say, well, I have an idea. I'm feeling very passionate about something. Your advice would be to bring the people together and start having dialogue. What would be your advice to them beyond that?
Most movements started in somebody's living room. You get for your backyard, people start talking to each other about, something that they really care deeply about. And then they find out that they're not alone, that there are others who care deeply. Well, the key about movements is that, of course, you have like these natural people because they've experienced it. They've maybe experienced sexual assault. They've experienced racism. They experienced being persecuted because they're gay or lesbian or queer, right? Or they have disabilities. So you have that. But the key is when movements are really successful and when they go beyond the actual people themselves who have the exact lived experience, and convincing others who maybe don't have that, but are willing to listen, learn, maybe walk in that movement's shoes, in a sense.
Because it doesn't take as many people. This is what I always think is so interesting about movements. You may have a small group of people, but that small group of people, when they're organized, when they're committed, it can change the many. Exactly. And you may not realize that in the beginning. And I'm thinking about all the movements that you and I are probably, when we started marching against the war in Vietnam, we didn't know that was going to have an impact of ending the war, but it did. And yet we did it because we saw young people dying and we didn't know why we were in that war. And many of us were like, we wanted peace rather than war. So, but we don't know what the outcome is. So I just want to encourage people that if you're out there with an idea, gather the people together. I think of even the Trauma Resource Institute. People said to me in the beginning, Elaine, I think this is a movement. I said, I always was a little bit, I don't know if we're a movement, but now okay. Jennifer Burton listens to this. She'll see, I told you it was a movement, because I've seen where we have spread well-being to communities throughout the world. But I've also seen you do that with Peace Over Violence, because it may have been that spark of Rome, Sacramento, Los Angeles. You see the little triangle there, and then it starts to spread.
And what's really interesting now, I think what we're seeing is movements being in solidarity with other movements. That is so powerful.
So can you talk a little bit, give us an example of what you mean by that?
Well, I would say the most recent for me is when people the most recent acknowledgement of how many hate crimes there are against Asian, Pacific Islanders, Asian Americans, that's come out throughout the pandemic. And the oppression and the actual attacks, the hatred that's coming out, and to see that many of us who support Black Lives Matter are also paying attention to that.
Yes.
And that even when I think of Denim Day and sexual violence, that we're looking at, well, it impacts this community a little bit differently. It does impact Black women differently than white women and other groups. And so when you start to make these connections, I think, it's an often used term right now, intersectionality, but it is such an important concept. And that means it goes back to my original thing that when I started to learn that you need to have a big mind because you have to see all the ingredients. Well, now we have to have a big mind. Our minds and our hearts have to get so big that we can be so inclusive that we are seeing the intersectionality of all of these issues.
I just have to do a shout out to Kimberly Crenshaw for coining that term, because I think that intersectionality, when we think of, each one of us, if we were to say, well, what are your intersections?
Right.
And that once we start paying attention to that, then I can see how we can also come together and maybe bind us in very human ways, rather than being so separate and siloed, to see those interconnections as well that happen.
It's so important for not only the moment we're in, but to get to that next moment where we can't. Someday we cannot have anybody at the margins. That's what we have to work.
And would that be wonderful if one day we could say that?
That's
There's
what
no
we
one
have
in
to
the
work for.
margin.
No one in the margins. No one left out.
Well, and I think
at Peace Over Violence, we're looking toward a world where no wife is abused, no child sexually assaulted, no kid goes hungry, right? And people can be safer and live very talented and creative lives.
Well,
that's what we're working for. That's what
yeah,
we're working
well,
toward.
Patti, I think you've done
Violence.
some of that. I think you've done it. I think there's always more work to do. But if you think about 50 years ago, where peace over violence was and where we were as a country, and to think about now there's advocates at police stations, and that the awareness of domestic violence and child abuse is so much more known, and the interventions that are happening are collaborative in many places. It's not perfect, but the collaboration has been awe-inspiring.
Important. And we have to go from awareness to prevention, because that's going to be the key. At one point, are we going to have less violence? That has to be
yes.
That has to be the goal, because we can continue to be aware, and it's so important because it's primary, and we have to develop systems that really function with well-being as part of what they're after, right?
Well, you're speaking my language.
I know, where CRIM comes in, and
that's right.
You're doing that. Again, the intersectionality of our work and your work, but we have to that's where I'm feeling frustration, because I've been a preventionist my whole life, but what am I preventing here? We're not preventing enough. It's still happening.
I've been thinking about this lately, because I've been sitting on some legislative committees where they've told us, well, they're not really interested in prevention. They're really interested in something else. And I go, if we can't be interested in prevention, how are we going to stop it? But I think maybe that's the next phase after awareness, Patti. And as I'm seeing that our time is slipping away, it's been so lovely to have you as a guest. I wanted to ask you if there is just one parting thought that you would like to leave our guests with today.
Well, I always come back to that healing is possible.
Yes.
I think it's
healing,
possible. Yeah, healing is possible. It's possible for individuals. It's possible for families. It's possible for communities. But we have to own that.
Yes.
We have to own that.
And if people
really believe that and work
towards it,
toward that, and we need to have a very big mind to understand that violence prevention is also about the quality of healthcare, the quality of education, right? The quality of our air and our climate and living on our planet, that people have enough to eat. That all of that goes toward violence prevention. That's what's going to prevent somebody from beating up his wife.
And so, Patti, thank you so much for that parting thought. And I just want everyone to know that you can reach Patti through peaceoverviolence.org. Thank you, our listeners. Remember what is true in your